Starting, as I said, good afternoon and thank you for joining us for this webinar on data-driven innovation. This webinar is brought to you by Finmark Trust. My name is Nicola Skuman and I am the Country Manager for Lesotho, South Africa and Tanzania, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Finmark Trust launched the SADC Innovation and Investment Challenge to try to develop an enabling innovation ecosystem that supports the design of products and services that meet the needs of underserved and unserved individuals. We anticipate that the solutions developed through this challenge will catalyze the development of innovative and scalable digital products and services that increase the availability of meaningful employment opportunities, particularly vulnerable groups such as women and children, the youth, and people living in rural areas. These solutions will improve access to and usage of basic services and lead to a more inclusive, responsible, and sustainable financial sector. The challenge aims to support early-stage tech-enabled innovations that support one or more of the 4 key development challenges that we have identified for our region: SMME financing, access to basic services, women in savings, and digital financial identity. Today's webinar focuses on data-driven innovation. That is how we can best use data to inform and support the development of products that address challenges across the 4 thematic areas. Our speaker today is Samuel Otim, a data science expert and the Managing Director of Trail Analytics. Sam has worked with Finmark Trust and the Eye-to-Eye facility on a number of projects, including a FinTech technical assistance project and as a data science mentor for seasons 2 and 3 of our data hack competition. Sam uses his project management and software development expertise to bridge the gap between business and technology. When an opportunity has been identified, he will rally the team and coordinate the development of technological solutions to satisfy the customers. We'll close this webinar session with a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask these in the chat box during the presentation. We will answer as many of these as possible within the time that we have available. If we have not managed to answer your question, please engage with Sam or with me or one of our other experts on Slack. So, Sam, if you'd like to get started.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much, Nicola. I hope I am loud and clear. I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. I'm not sure how I'll get the feedback on whether everyone can hear me clearly, but my hope and prayer is that I am very clear. So good evening, everybody, or good afternoon. At least I know in Uganda, it is 5 p.m. right now. So wherever you are, greetings to you. Thank you, Nicola, for the opportunity. Maybe let me start with introducing myself and very quickly taking you through who I am and what I do. Nicola has done a commendable job in briefing you on some of the work I have done with Finmark Trust in the past. But very, very quickly, my name's Otim Samuel. I am a systems designer stroke consultant, which is a glorified way of saying I design system interfaces or I draw system interfaces. I'm also a data scientist and I do quite a substantial amount of project management. So you could call me a project manager as well as an analyst. My company that Nicola mentioned, Trail Analytics, was registered in November 2018. And for the last 8+ years, we've been working with clients such as commercial banks, NGOs, various fintechs, and most of what we tend to do is software development. So that's just a quick background on who I am. I thought I should also give a very quick heads up on what we're facing in Uganda and how it might affect me through this webinar. At the moment, most of us in our countries are probably going through some kind of lockdown. That's the same situation in Uganda. What even gets more entertaining within Uganda is that our primary power source is being clogged by a couple of plants that are seeking attention. So what's happening is this entire picture you see on the screen, the highlighted section is supposed to be clear water. As of 24 hours ago, these are the number of plants that we have concentrated within that region. The reason I'm saying this is because in the event that I suddenly go off, it's because I'm working from home and I've suddenly lost electricity. So my internet connection is basically plugged into the mains. I just thought I'd mention this so that in case I go off, I'm praying and hoping that doesn't happen. I just thought I'd give you this heads up before we dive right in. Okay, so for today, I'm going to be talking about data science and the importance of data in innovation, decision-making, and many other things. I'm going to start by focusing on data science, and then eventually I will move on to the importance of data. Now, I hope everybody is seeing my screen clearly and hearing me pretty clearly, so I'm just going to proceed at this point. And I'll also ask my colleagues in Finmark Trust to help me with some of the polls that I had set up. As we go along, I like to keep things very interactive. I like to ensure that everybody is a part of the experience and that I'm not only talking to myself. So that's kind of my approach. Let's start with data science. It's very hard to decouple data science from the role of a data scientist. So if we look at who a data scientist is, I would start by saying there are lots of definitions to who a data scientist is. Now, I prefer the simpler one, which is a data scientist is very simply put, a statistician who knows more about programming, that is writing code, things like C#, Java, C++. Generally, a data scientist is a statistician who knows more about programming than most statisticians. And it also holds true that a data scientist is a programmer who knows more about statistics than most programmers. So the sweet spot right in the center is the characteristic of what you call the ideal data scientist. There is a blend or marriage between statistics and programming. Why I add the element of curiosity is because underlying all of this is the need for a data scientist to be passionate about learning, taking in new information, discovering new things. That means a data scientist can't excel unless they are simply curious about what's happening around them. Now, I'm just going to take a quick look. Okay. A couple of people are saying they can't hear my voice. Is that the case with everybody else? Oh, I hope everybody can hear me.
I can hear you.
All right, I was seeing quite a couple of chats coming in, so I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't doing a monologue. Great. So as long as a couple of people can hear, others can't, when it comes down to technology, we're not always on the same page, but I pray and hope that everybody will ultimately be able to hear me. If some people can hear me, that means possibly it might be a connection issue, but more than likely, at least I am not muted. All right, moving on from the role of a data scientist. So who makes the best data scientists? Now, this is open to debate, but there are a number of factors that come into play. And just to underline what I had previously said, data scientists tend to have a blend between programming and statistics, but there's also a great element or a great input from curiosity, simple interest. If you listen to some of the Microsoft data scientist talks, some of them will tell you that if you listen or if you analyze data long enough, data actually tells a story. So it's about how curious you are. What kind of information can I draw out from the data? If I overlay some information one with another, or if I overlap some information, what story is it going to tell me? Now, my very first question, and I hope that the poll is available, based on what I have said, and because I believe strongly in involving everybody within the discussion, is who make the best data scientists? And this is something I'd just like to throw to us. I hope the poll is available. Wonderful. I'm going to give us approximately 30 seconds. It shouldn't take us too long. There are 4 options: statisticians, politicians, computer scientists, and curious statisticians and computer scientists. So let's just take the poll very quickly, and in about 30 seconds, we should be able to see the results. So take your time, fill out, select, based on what I've just been talking about, give us your thoughts, or give me your thoughts, who make the best data scientists. And I think we should be able to get the results in a short while. 30 seconds and counting. Wonderful, the results are in. For a second, I never expected anyone to select politicians. That I have to be honest on. But all right, a lot of you believe curious statisticians and computer scientists make the best data scientists. Computer scientists is second, as well as statisticians. Those two ties, so 5 people have selected statisticians and computer scientists. Thanks a lot. I just wanted to get our thoughts on that one. The fact of the matter is you could literally have anyone making a good data scientist. But as you've rightly all pointed out, curiosity a strength in statistics as well as computer science has
references to it.
Okay, wonderful. All right, I just had somebody else coming onto the audio. Back into this now. With regards to data scientists, it's very, very common that a lot of the time, the data scientists began their careers either as statisticians or data analysts. It's very rare to have had a politician who ultimately ended up as a data scientist. And even if they did, I guess the question is how many people would believe what they finally post. However, underlying the need for data is the fact that a data scientist has to be very interested, one, in the kind of data that they're working with. There's a critical element about the curiosity, what we call creative curiosity, twisting data about, trying to merge data, different bits of information together. Many of us, I looked at a record of all the information that we had sent through to Finmark Trust. And I noted that there's a fair distribution between the genders, male and female. So I can use a couple of examples from different sporting fields. Those of you who've watched football, let's say the Premier League or even Formula One, there are lots of statistics that are constantly being thrown out. A lot of analytics, predictive analytics that are being done. When is one car likely to overtake another? Which team is likely to win? Which team is likely to lose? These teams have never won whenever they've played in this and this area, or such and such a team has never beaten another under such and such circumstances. This is what we call creative curiosity. You're simply getting different bits of information, using them to draw a conclusion, and ultimately, that conclusion has to be simple enough for the average person to understand. That is why all of this is crowned by saying you have to have a knack for translating ideas into profit or decision guidance. You have to be able to decide, are you going to play such and such a player because in the past he doesn't perform very well under this formation? That raises a question as to what kind of decision are you going to take? What about profits? If you make such a decision, it's probably not going to have a great impact on the kind of profits you're going to have. Underlying all of this is data. We have to work with the data, and that's the role of the data scientist. And all of this feeds into what data science is about. So just to wrap it up on the data scientist bit, what do data scientists do? One, they gather large amounts of, let's say, unstructured data that is not necessarily organized, and transform it into usable information. Now, many of these points are going to be related, so I'll keep on referring to each of them as I go along. Number two, they solve business-related problems using data-driven techniques. Number three, they work with several tools. The more fancy tools out there are the likes of R, Python, SAS, but the more basic tools which many of us are already familiar with are the likes of Excel and even PowerPoint. The reason I bring PowerPoint into this equation is because right now I'm using PowerPoint to present, to make a point and make it very clear for everybody. There's also the element of they have to master tactics such as machine learning, deep learning. The reason you have to master them and not just master them, stay on top of them, is because the world is ever changing. Things that are in play today are probably not going to be operational in a couple of months or in a couple of years. We saw what happened to CD drives and floppy disks. That's the same applies to SMS. So many technologies are constantly coming up, so you really need to stay at the forefront if you do not want to fall behind. Next, they also need to be able to communicate and collaborate with other users. This bit is, I cannot begin to emphasize how important this part is. You need to understand tools like Excel, PowerPoint. You need to be able to make things very simple for the novice user. The simpler you can make things, the better for you. We refer to the departments like IT, business, but management is one of the departments that has to take decisions based on available data. So point number 5 is rather critical. Point number 6 and point number 1 are closely related because at the end of the day, you have to identify order, identify trends, as well as the patterns within the data. So you have to identify the order, trends, and patterns within the data. And we're going to look at a couple of situations where this becomes stated very clearly. So that's really a wrap up on data science and data scientists. Now, I can jump to the next phase about the importance of data in innovation, decision-making, and so many other areas. Now, I could have approached this by giving you a thesis and done a monologue, but I strongly believe in having what we call dialogue or a kind of collaborative encounter. So I'm going to use case studies, and then I'm going to get your opinions on the different case studies because these will emphasize the importance of data, both in decision-making as well as in coming up with innovative solutions. So I'm going to come up with the first hypothesis. This is something that has been on my mind for a while, and I've thrown it by a couple of my friends. I'm using this as a case study. So hypothesis one, there is this theory that the farther away a country lies from the equator, the higher the standard of living, or what we call the GDP per capita, is for the people. Another way to put this is, the farther away a country lies from the equator, the more developed the country is. Now, if you think about it, visualize it in your mind. Countries along the equator, we've got countries such as Uganda, my own country, Congo, and a couple of others. I think Brazil is also crossed by the equator. Think about whether they are mostly third world or first, what you'd call developed countries. And that is just to put it mentally. Then as you go farther away from the equator, think about countries like, say, South Africa, then you get all the way to Europe, Canada, Australia. You begin to see a certain pattern developing. So I'm going to throw out another poll just to make sure everybody's engaged on this one. I do not want to be monologuing, and ask, is this true or false? The hypothesis is, the farther away from the equator a country lies, the more likely they are to be developed. Thank you, Rob, for throwing up the poll. We have about 30 seconds. Give me your opinion. And for the love of God, I don't expect anyone to say I don't care, because it's supposed to only be me, given that I'm from Uganda and the equator crosses my country. Most of you, actually the rest of you, are not in Uganda, and I believe you're not crossed by the equator, so you should be able to give me your opinions on this one. Let's have the answers, and in about 30 seconds, we should be getting the feedback. Okay, I'm pretty sure that was simple. Most of you should have given your opinions by this point. Absolutely. I don't get it. How is that other people are selecting I don't care? I thought I was the only one supposed to be able to select that. Okay, most of you agree. There are a couple of you that say no. So we have 65% now. We have come up with these conclusions. Thanks a lot for this feedback. We've come up with these conclusions based on a quick analysis. Let us dive right into how we would work this out in detail and be able to use data to justify this conclusion. First of all, I'm using data from the IMF estimates, which are taken around 2018, 2019. This is a list, courtesy of Wikipedia, of the GDP per capita in the following countries. This is listed by the highest country on this list. But this has nothing to do with, I'm not trying to say one country is less than another. We're just basically coming up with some statistical analysis and then trying to use data to justify our position. So Luxembourg takes the lead, and the list keeps going down through Switzerland, down to Singapore, and all the way to Finland, and so on and so forth. There is a list of 186 countries. Just by looking at this list, it's going to be very hard to conclude, even though this is active data that we could use to make up our minds or to justify this hypothesis, agree with it or debunk it. The other alternative is we could go for what they call heat maps or countrywide visualizations or global visualizations, which is we could come up with a map that shows the GDP per capita, plot it out against every country, give them a particular color, and then we could also draw the equator across all these countries. And then it would be very easy for us to look and say, instead of looking at 186 countries, we'd look at a single map and say, is there some element of truth to this? And when we look at it, the GDP per capita, for instance, I'm looking at Uganda and Congo, is actually less than $1,000. This is around 2018. And remember, these are IMF estimates, but they're pretty decent. Kenya, which is also crossed by the equator, sits between 1,000 and 2,500. And then we also look at countries like Brazil and so on and so forth. But as we move further away from the equator, we start noticing that South Africa, Zambia, the United States, Canada, Alaska, Australia, all seem to have much, much higher GDP per capita. And that immediately gives us an impression of there is an element of truth to this hypothesis, that indeed, the farther away one moves from the equator, there actually seems to be a correlation, a strong correlation between the higher GDP per capita and the distance from the equator. Now, we could take this a notch further and ask ourselves, what have we learned from just looking at data? From the way I have phrased this, we started off by declaring a hypothesis, which means you first of all establish what objective are you trying to achieve. The objective could be multiple things. One, you could look at the project you're working on I've looked at the different projects or the different innovations that the teams are working on. Some people are working on digital payment solutions, others are working on water saving solutions, water storage solutions, and so many other brilliant innovations. You have to make that very clear, and you have to keep it as simple as possible so as not to confuse the audience. That bit is very critical. That's why I start by saying the objective or the hypothesis has to be laid out very clearly. Secondly, you look at the data. You have to identify suitable sources of data. I laid down a disclaimer that I am using data from Wikipedia. Ordinarily, I should have been running such an analysis probably from data from, let's say, the World Bank or the IMF, even though Wikipedia is drawing from the IMF. But it's important to let people know, as well as be very clear about where you're sourcing your data from. If you're building an innovative solution, if you're building, let's say, a digital payment solution, it's important that you analyze or you make very, very clear where you're collecting your data from, and more importantly, how you're storing it. If you're collecting things like, say, the dates of birth, you need to be clear about how you're storing that. You'd also need to be clear about when you're storing it, and if you also have to indicate that you're storing this data, this information that you're collecting on a particular date. I'll get into that in more detail as we go along, but I'm only emphasizing that there is a very critical need to store the data accurately, because when you don't do that, you can't have reliable statistics that you're going to use to make decisions. Now, once you've stored the data, the visualization bit becomes very easy. You've got lots of tools out there, Microsoft Power BI, Tableau, and so many others that simplify the whole process of visualization. Some relational database systems, MySQL, Oracle, give you other exceptional tools that you could actually use to also do the visualization. So there's lots of tools out there to aid with the visualization. Right here, I simply used a quick map. When you're done with the collection of the information, as well as defining your objective, then we can get into the interpretation of the data or drawing up the conclusions. Interpretation usually leads to the decision-making bit. So when we have merged all of that, the intersection right there is what guides us on making a decision. If you have falsified data, if you have inaccurate data, your decisions are going to be flawed, because you're not going to be making grand decisions based on accurate information. That's fundamentally what happens. All right, I'm seeing a couple of chats coming in. I just want to make sure I'm not missing out on anything important. Okay, all right. I will get back to these as we go along. Let me just run through this, and then I'll take a minute and look at some of the feedback that has come in, and I think we'll have the Q&A session at the end. So basically, like we had started by saying, the farther away a country lies from the equator, then the higher the standard of living or the GDP per capita is for the people. Now, we had come up with that hypothesis. We looked at the data. We managed to visualize the data. The next step is to make a decision based on this information. One decision could be the equator causes poverty, which I would avoid you if you came up with such a decision, because I really think, no, that's not exactly what we're driving towards, because we can't then conclude we must all move away from the equator. The other angle is there are other factors associated with the equatorial belt which necessitate further study. And this is something that becomes very critical to this kind of analysis. Sometimes one factor, one variable is insufficient to help us make a decision. The fact that there is a strong correlation between the distance of a country from the equator and the GDP per capita simply tells us that there might be another factor that actually decides why we have a lot more higher GDP per capita the farther away people move from the equator, or the farther away a country lies from the equator. There might be political factors, there might be psychosocial factors, and so many other factors that come into play. One of my friends gave me this analogy. He said, generally, the farther away from the equator people live, they encounter what we call adverse weather effects, or adverse weather types, meaning you've got winter and you've also got summer. In the winter, the ground can't yield anything, which means you have to plan for the winter. That means you have to engage in a habit of saving. The moment a person has that mentality of the need to save, the need to plan ahead, it makes them more attentive to their usage of time. And when people are more attentive to their usage of time, they end up being technically more productive, because they look at every minute as being valuable. You know that if you don't save, you die. When you have that at the back of your mind, it has a significant impact on the way you work and your output at the end of the day. Around the equatorial belt, there is a certain sense of laissez-faire. One simply gets a seed, and I've seen this a lot, at least in my country. One gets a seed, drops it anywhere, next day it grows. You don't have to do too much to it. So the need for mechanization is not significant until you realize another country is doing it. Now that analogy tells me that it may not be the fact that the equator is causing poverty, but it might be the mindset of the people that live around the equator as a result of what we call the comfort that's created living along the equatorial belt. Now, that's just one hypothesis. This is another area that, out of curiosity, if you have a curious mind, you can pick it up and explore it further. All I'm just showing is how we can use data ultimately to justify, debunk or agree with a hypothesis and ultimately move forward. Then you can make a decision based on that. So in this case, any decision you make is not based on the fact that it's the equator causing the trouble. It's basically the fact that we need to learn and basically develop a mindset for planning and saving. Jumping on to the next illustration. Like I said, I like to use case studies. So I was reading a book by this gentleman called Chris Voss, and I'm going to explain why it's relevant to this particular context. Chris Voss is a gentleman who basically worked with the FBI as a negotiator, and his experience gives insights into the way the human mind works. Now, I'm not marketing the book, I'm simply telling you that this was important. I found this relevant to the particular context of how we can use data to make decisions. Jumping into the background, let me define the scenario, and then after that, I'm going to ask you to share with me your opinions on the chat, and we'll basically carry it forward from there. In his negotiations, he encountered the following situation. A woman, a relative of a prominent politician, is kidnapped in Haiti. This is sometime around, I think, 2000 or 2001. The kidnappers want a ransom of $150,000. So Chris is called in to negotiate with them to secure her release. So this is just to give you the context within which the data has to be utilized. So let's look at the second hypothesis I come up with. The hypothesis upon which Chris bases his negotiations or his tactics in engaging with the kidnappers is that the kidnapping is politically motivated. Once you have the hypothesis laid out, the next step is to get data to test the hypothesis. And at this point, I'd like to involve a couple of you in this particular experience. And this is the data that Chris ultimately put together. So I've sort of put it into a graph just to paint out the picture clearly. What I want to find out from you is, what interpretations would you draw from this data? So let me explain the data first, and then after that, we're going to go to the chat. Feel free to write out your interpretations. We're going to have about, let's see, how much time have I used so far? We've used up about 25 minutes. So that means we have about 15 more minutes. So we can use 3 minutes to write out our possible interpretation. So let me explain what's happening here. The average kidnappings in Haiti by day of the week is what I've plotted out in front of you. On Monday, we noticed that approximately 80 kidnappings have been happening. On Tuesday, it drops to about 73. When we get to Wednesday, this number fizzles out all the way to Saturday and then peaks a little on Sunday. This is the average number of kidnappings in Haiti. Then the total number of threats, or what we call the average number of threats, that's the red line plotted out. Threats are whenever negotiators engage with kidnappers. The kidnappers start off by having, let's say, a 3-day of silence, and then after that, they'll reach out to the family, and eventually they'll start laying out the terms. And as they begin discussing, once in a while, they'll say things like, hey, we need the money or else this is that. That is counted as a threat. So we document all of that over time and plot the total number of threats that they issue. And we notice there seems to be a pattern in how many threats are issued based on the day of the week. Based on this, I'd like to call all of us who are listening in on the webinar, go to the chat very quickly in 3 minutes. Tell me what interpretations you draw from this particular pattern that we see on the screen. So 3 minutes starting now. Okay, so let's go to the chat. I think I also use this opportunity to look at some of the chats. Okay, I'm looking at some of the comments that are coming in as you come up with your opinions. Great. So let's see. Guys, tell me what interpretations you draw up. Somebody asked what's the title of the book by Chris Voss. It's Never Split the Difference. That's the title of the book. I'm going to type it out here as well. But by all means, Titans are religious. Yes, okay. Arnold, thank you. That's a very good analysis. Titans are religious. Can we get the ebook? The ebook, I would recommend you buy it because never split the difference. And I am going to post this to everybody, all panelists and attendees. Okay. But this is not marketing for the book. By all means, look at it. Then the number of threats and kidnappings are inversely proportional. Interesting, inversely proportional. That is Marote, Magoma, the trends between kidnappings and threats. Okay, that's your interpretation. Good. Kidnappings happen when people are at work. Cuthbert, very interesting, very interesting. Okay, I like the way you're interpreting that. And okay, I realized I had stopped my time accidentally. On Monday, the kidnappers are broke and hungry for earnings. Threats increase midweek to pressurize for money. James, you are very close to what Chris actually came up with. Very, very close. It looks like most threats happen on Thursday. Nyenga, good. You have an insight right there. We need to build on that. The threat is directly proportional to the time taken after the kidnapping. Okay. Weekend effect. Kidnappers attack when people are at work with work pressure. Joseph, thank you very much. Joseph, glad you could attend. I thought you weren't going to be able to. It seems like the kidnapping rates. Okay, I need to expand the screen right here. Okay. It seems like the kidnapping rate decreases on Saturday for some reason. It might be that the kidnappers are spending time and money made with a family. Langa, you are very close. By the way, if I adulterate any of your names, please forgive me. My trespasses. I'm from Uganda. I'm still working on my SADC accent, so bear with me. Ransoms are likely to be paid during the weekdays. Stuart, good enough. That's a good insight. The kidnappers have high need for money on the weekends. Mapalo, you are literally on it. You have hit it. I don't think we need to go any further. This confirms that, in fact, the kidnapper will never call him the way he acted. Mondley, thank you very much. That's a nice one. Okay, I think what we have done is we have nailed it. Mapalo literally got it. The kidnappers have a high need for money over the weekends. I think at this point we can pause on the feedback on the chats. Thanks a lot. So this is basically what the hypothesis stated. Kidnappings are politically motivated. That was the hypothesis that Chris started with. Here's the thing. A politically motivated kidnapping tends to have a very distributed pattern. There are no specific days when the kidnapping happens. If they happen to be on Wednesdays most of the time, it tends to be a coincidence. The fact that we have this pattern developing, whereby on Monday, the kidnappers seem like they're trying to get an early start of the week, and then of course fizzling out towards the weekend, like Mpalo stated, ultimately, these kidnappers are not politically motivated kidnappers. They are, to use Chris's words, garden variety thugs who are simply looking for party money. They just want to party over the weekend. That is why you notice a number of the kidnappings happen on Mondays and Tuesdays at the start of the week, and they fizzle out towards the weekend because by Friday, they're hoping to have gotten paid. Ultimately, they simply want party money to party over the weekend. Now, why is this important? Why is this insight important? First of all, thank you all for the feedback. You guys are on point. You basically had a number of insights, many of which I hadn't actually thought about at first. But why is this important? It's because a politically motivated kidnapping could command anywhere above $100,000, any amount, because it's politically motivated. However, if somebody is just looking for party money, to have a good time in Haiti, you don't need $150,000. Now, here is the interesting thing. Based on that piece of information, Chris remodeled his entire approach and brought down the negotiation from $150,000 to the point that they ended up paying just under $5,000 for the ransom. And even though it was to a politician's relative, she was released for less than $5,000. I think just to spite the kidnappers, they actually threw in a loaf of bread or something as ridiculous as that, just to basically say, yeah, we could do this. I found that rather fascinating that this is where somebody plots out data, uses it to come up with a conclusion, and finally drives a decision, changes their whole mode of operation, but ultimately nails down to what the other party is looking for. If we were to wrap that up in one word, we'd say, when you know what the other party wants, based on even the data that you have collected, particularly behavioral trends. Nowadays, Google is obsessed with that, by the way. Behavioral trends is another subject that we could go on and spend an entire day talking about. When you know what the other party wants, you're in a better position to negotiate in your favor. Now, this applies to many of the tools that we are building. If you're building a payment system and you're negotiating, let's say, some kind of settlement with a mobile network operator, when you understand what the mobile network operator is looking for, it's easy to negotiate giving them what they want. Even though they started with a very high number, you can actually bring them down to the number that they want, just because you've looked at patterns in the past. But you have to plot these patterns based on reliable sources of data. That's why, once again, I bring out this Venn diagram. Your objectives have to be clear. In our case, we actually ended up debunking the hypothesis that the null hypothesis didn't apply, because it's not that the kidnappers were politically motivated. They were not politically motivated. The data sources also have to be equally reliable. Your visualizations have to help you with that. The first time we used the heat map, we plotted them out against the countries of the world. This time we've used the bar graph and looked at the trends. And suddenly we're able to notice the threats go up towards the weekend. The number of kidnappings drop towards the weekend. This is not the pattern that you'd have with politically motivated kidnappings, because politically it tends to be rather distributed. And then finally, the conclusion is that, okay, if guys are looking for 150,000, but all we know is that they're looking for party money, we can simply bring the negotiation a lot lower. And that's just another way that data can be used both in innovation, decision-making, and so many others. Now, the third item, which I would bring to our attention, is one that I'm going to leave on the table for curiosity's sake. Now, I believe that I've gotten your attention sufficiently, and many of you have what it takes to become or to be exceptional data scientists and to use data exceptionally in your innovations. So this I'm going to simply leave on the table and say, in your free time, when you're curious, or as and when the needs permit, utilize this and probably explore it a little further. On the left, we've got lawyers, and on the right, we've got engineers. I've used an example of the gentleman who played the role of Harvey Specter in the series Suits. And on the right, an engineer who we all know, Elon Musk. One thing I want to point out about lawyers is this. Lawyers protect what exists. Many of you are working on innovations. At some point, you're going to find yourself faced with the need to possibly copyright the innovations. My company recently encountered that. We were signing a contract, we were renewing our contract with one of our clients, and the client insisted that we provide proof that we own the software that we are licensing to them. And my one question to them was, you're asking me to do, you're literally turning to Facebook and saying, prove to us that you own Facebook. That just doesn't make sense. But then the company, in this case, the company is a commercial bank, turned to us and said, guys, it's not that we're trying to make your lives miserable. It's just that we were recently sued for using software that the person who was licensing it to us did not technically own. So that's why we require you to also license, to copyright your own software and provide evidence that you own the software. Why I'm bringing this up is because this is where lawyers come in. Because lawyers ultimately are the ones who guide us on how to do the whole copyright procedure. It's a cost you sometimes have to incur in protecting yourself, but a lawyer's general mindset is to protect that which exists. That's where you have all these copyright laws and the likes coming in. So lawyers also defend. So a lawyer's mindset is what we call protective or defensive. On the contrary, engineers create what doesn't exist. Many of your innovations, digital payment systems, water saving systems, and so many others, water management systems, lots of them all lead towards creation of that which doesn't exist or modifying that which exists to give some form of value. So an engineer, as opposed to a lawyer, is looking out for that which doesn't exist. Now, while a lawyer is defending, an engineer is pioneering. An engineer is looking to the horizon and saying, where are we going next? A lawyer is saying, protect that which we have collected. This in no way means one is superior to the other. I'm simply laying the case to make it clear that the world needs both. But there is a very interesting hypothesis out of this, that a country that has a higher proportion of lawyers to engineers is likely to go in one direction and not the other. A country that has a higher proportion of engineers and a higher proportion of engineers versus lawyers is likely to also go in the other direction. Why? Engineers are pioneers. They're looking ahead. They're going forward. Lawyers, on the other hand, are protecting, they're defending that which exists. I'd be curious to have the statistics on how many engineers China has versus how many lawyers it has. The same might apply to the US. Now in the US, it's a very litigious society. So we keep on hearing about lawsuits going around all the time. I'd be curious to know how many engineers the US has versus the lawyers. And this might give us an idea of which of these countries is going in a certain direction. And then probably we could also plot their GDP per capita over time and look at the number of, look at the changes in, let's say, the number of engineers versus the lawyers. All of this comes to a third hypothesis, which I am going to now place on the table and leave it to us to marinate over. Hypothesis 3, which I actually classify as incomplete, basically. When a country has more engineers than lawyers, its future is guaranteed. Now, that's a very poorly phrased hypothesis because it leaves a lot to doubt. There could be so many twists and turns to that. But what I want us to do in our free time, what I want each of you to do in your free time is just chew upon this and see how you could go about coming up with a conclusion, how you collect data, how you could refine this hypothesis, and ultimately what kind of conclusions you could make, but what direction you'll also be taking at the end of the day. Now, the reason I end with that is because it's important that whenever we spend time on something, it's always leading us towards a particular target. Because if we're not working towards a target, there's a danger that we're simply spending time on something that is counterproductive. There's no point in having information. I mean, sometimes people come up with these fascinating statistics. I listen to many of them in football and I ask myself, okay, what are we supposed to do with that piece of information? Now, I don't have any of them off the top of my head, but many of you who are fans of soccer, you probably know what I'm talking about. All right. The reason I laid that out is just for us to chew upon it, because as we keep interacting on the Slack channel, I'm going to be working with Finmark Trust to lay out a couple of boot camps, and we want to definitely take our ideas forward, look at different strategies and ways to carry our concepts or innovative ideas to the next level. So if there's any takeaway you can get from everything that I have been saying, and I know I am very close to the end of my time. If I'm not mistaken, I think I only have approximately 4 minutes, so if I've not overshot the time already. Takeaways from everything that I have said, I'll just put it down into 4 things. For data to have any importance in whatever you're doing, number 1, your objectives need to be clear. If your objective is to build a system, let's say a digital payment system that's going to transact approximately $4 million every day, and from each of those, each transaction is going to be worth, let's say, 1/10 of that. That becomes your objective. You have to be clear about your objective. You have to make it very, very simple as well. It's important that in addition to being clear, you have to lay your objectives very simply, because the simpler something is, the easier it is for people to grasp it. It's amazing that the human mind works, especially when you complicate matters around people, they tend to shut down. And especially when you're trying to market a concept to them, many of your innovative ideas are meant to ultimately be marketed at the end of the day. You need to make sure that people understand what you're selling to them. People understand what it is you're trying to present to them so that they can make a decision fairly quickly. Using big words, I saw a couple of innovative concepts. They had some really big words, and I was thinking, by the time I am having trouble understanding it, I pity the customers who will ultimately be looking at this. But that's point number 1. Make sure your objectives are clear. Number 2, your data sources have to be reliable. Your data sources might be external, they might be internal. That means you might be collecting information on transactions. Digital payment systems tend to do that a lot. So every time money moves from one account to another, if it's sitting in an escrow account or if it's sitting in a suspense account, that has to be logged somewhere. Your data sources have to be terribly reliable, because without reliable data sources, you're likely to make the wrong decision from a misinterpretation of information. If you're basing information on people's ages and you didn't store the ages correctly, then you're going to basically make incorrect decisions. Number 3, the analysis doesn't always have to be complicated. At first, when I was thinking through the issue of distribution of countries from the equator, or rather distance of countries from the equator versus their GDP per capita, I kept on wondering, all right, what should I use? Frequency table? Should I use some kind of, should I segregate the distances from the equator? And then suddenly it hit me that, hello, why don't you just plot the colors against a map? Now, instead of me actually doing that, somebody had already done that. So I picked up the information and I said, voila, in less than an hour, I had all the analysis I needed to do the presentation. So the analysis doesn't always have to be very complicated. Bar graphs are some of the simplest things, but they can be some of the most informative. Be careful about where you use pie charts from. Pie charts also have their place. Depending on the amount of information you're displaying, a pie chart becomes relevant. But point is, the analysis doesn't have to be complicated. Much more detailed analysis obviously can get very, very complicated. And sometimes when you're running real-time systems, that's when tools like Hadoop come in very, very handy, and you have all sorts of Amazon tools out there that actually help you with making decisions, split-second decisions. But for the most part, you don't always have to complicate it, because remember, most of your audience is probably not going to understand very complicated analysis anyway. And finally, your decisions should guide your actions. There's no point in analyzing lots of data if it doesn't lead up to something. There has to be an actionable decision, or there has to be a strategy that you're laying out for in the future. And that's why your conclusions at the end of the day from all the data analysis have to guide your actions. So as you go about preparing your innovative solutions, and as we keep working together through this, let's focus on these. And I hope the items or the details that I have shared throughout this webinar will be very helpful for you in the long run and the short run. Thank you once again for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And thanks again to Finmark Trust. I think I can hand over back to Nicola at this stage, or we can get into the Q&A. Nicola, please advise.
Thanks very much, Sam. That was very informative and very interesting. We have got one question here that's already been asked. Mapolo asks, what are the known most effective ways to gather data from a pool of potential customers for a product that's still in concept?
What are the most effective ways to gather data from a pool of customers or products?
That's still in its concept phase.
Oh, at the concept phase. So at the concept phase, I think what we're basically looking at is we do not yet have a lot of information, if I'm not mistaken. So we're basically using what we call available published information just to collect data and guide us in a decision that we have to take. Is that a correct assumption of what Mapolo is asking? I just want to make sure I answer the right question.
That's what I infer from it.
Okay. So let me give a very quick thought, and this is based on a couple of books that I have read, especially from people who focus predominantly on marketing of products. They say when you don't have a lot of data to work with, you can use what they call, you can infer from what we call global statistics, or what we call averages that are available within the market. If, for instance, people tell you the majority of men buy this kind of newspaper, then this kind of program, 60% of its audience is women. That just gives you an idea that this is generic information that's available within the public domain, and you can use it to direct a decision that you want to take. Of course, as you keep on getting more granular, you're more than likely going to have to change the information, but that becomes one source of data that you can get. The other that I have worked with when I was mentoring some of the institutions in the data hacks is to utilize what we call sample data. Now, samples tend to have their place within the whole ecosystem, but bottom line, or underlying all of this, is that samples guide you. If I'm trying to target 5,000 farmers and I don't have a lot of information, I'm still at the concept, I could probably talk to about 5 farmers and get some information from them. A sample of 5 farmers may not be representative of the entire population of 5,000 farmers, but it's a starting point. Ultimately, I like to say a little data is better than no data. So just talking to a couple of farmers, or those who are closest to me, or taking a sample, however small it will be, gives me a starting point. Those are the immediate 2 thoughts I have that come to mind. I don't know if I have addressed that one thoroughly. I really hope I have.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Another question come through. How do I get data from Facebook? What tools are available for data harvesting? And then can one get your company profile, which I can send out. So I can put your company profile on Slack.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Nicola. You can put my company profile on Slack. Thank you very much. With regards getting data from Facebook, there's there's a couple of things that become very tricky. So I'm going to talk about not just Facebook, I'm going to talk about Twitter, LinkedIn, all three primary social media agencies, Google inclusive. Sometimes getting data from Facebook can be a little tricky. Ask the Oxford, or what was it, that recent company that got into trouble for mining data and utilizing it from Facebook. But there are tools that allow you to collect data. Facebook itself, especially if you're a marketer on Facebook, it might allow you a certain amount of data, what I would call harvesting. But this is where, for instance, you've paid for a sponsored post, and then Facebook itself allows you to collect information on the customers. Most likely they will not give you things like email addresses, but they will allow you to see certain bits of information, mostly aggregated data. For instance, people who are responding to your ads, 40% of them are coming from Rwanda, 70% of them are coming from South Africa, and things of that nature. They might also give you the distribution of their genders. The whole point is that they'll give you a certain amount of data. Likely it's going to be aggregated, but I assume what you're looking for is very specific data, disaggregated data. You're not looking for summaries, you're looking for specifics. Getting that from Facebook might be tricky. Twitter, on the other hand, seems to have some APIs that allows you to mine that data. The R language actually has a couple of libraries that allow you to pull data from Twitter. On the other hand, LinkedIn is very strict about obtaining data. Unless I'm mistaken, LinkedIn actually doesn't allow harvesting of data. Google, on the other hand, courtesy of their APIs, the developer APIs in particular, they could allow you to collect certain amounts of data which is already within the public domain. If you go to Google Maps and you look up certain information, you'll find that the data is already within the public domain. So you can actually run an API or some kind of algorithm to mine the data. It really depends. So bottom line, it depends on what you're doing. And ultimately, the platform from which you're trying to get it. From Facebook, it might be tricky. If you want it aggregated, yes, you might be able to get it from Facebook, but on condition that more than likely you're doing a sponsored post, or let's say you're running some kind of advert. But if you're simply trying to harvest data, that can be rather challenging. So we'll need to know specifically what you're trying to do to be able to support you better in that area. So I think that answers that question, I hope.
Yes.
Okay.
The next question, how do data analysts keep objective in cases where they are experts and deal with complex issues in the middle of competition?
How do data analysts keep objective in cases where
they are the experts?
Or where they are the experts?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is that sometimes a data analyst is an expert in a particular field, has certain domain knowledge, probably is a medical doctor, and yet somebody is trying to run a hypothesis that debunks a typical or a commonly known situation. For instance, chloroquine can cure, I don't know what, chloroquine can cure probably cancer, something like that. I'm assuming this is what the question is driving at. If that is the case, it's a challenge. I'm not going to mince words. It's very difficult to remain objective, but it comes down to how you communicate your objectivity, how you communicate your position. Many times in corporate environments, if a person's coming for an interview, and I'm just giving this as an example, if a person's coming for an interview and I did not know that I was related to this person, or I did not know that I actually know the person who's coming for the interview, if the person shows up for the interview, it's courteous for me to declare that I have a historical relationship with this person. I know this person. I have probably worked with them before. They are related to me this and this way, meaning I cannot be considered to be objective in this situation. So I'll probably step back. If, however, my opinion is required, then I will declare ahead of time that, by the way, from experience, this is what I know about the person. So understand that my experience with this person might be affecting my judgment. Now, in this case, if I'm the data expert and somebody is challenging a field that I am intimately familiar with, I'll tell them that be advised that my experience tells me that this is what happens when you administer this drug to this kind of situation. However, the fact that we are out here to test it means we may have to explore the following, and this, that. That way I'm letting everybody know that there's a possibility that my opinions might actually be biased, but it's always a nice thing to do that. It actually shows maturity. And a lot of this boils down to how mature the data scientist or the data expert is to be able to provide information and guidance. So it's very hard to remain objective, but when you're faced with such a situation, the best way forward is to simply declare that you have certain preconceived notions. And then after that, it actually helps you psychologically to try and assess the situation from a very level playing field. So in my case, I've found that there are many times when I say, I am not a big fan of this and this kind of sport, or I am not a big fan of this and this kind of approach within management. But that said, let me try and be as objective as I can. That way anyone listening to me understands that, okay, I initially declared my handicap, but now I'm doing everything in my power. And it just tells you that I'm simply human. So that's my take on that particular angle.
I definitely agree with that. I think we can squeeze in one last question. We've got a couple of minutes left. So this question is, we have seen how bad the economic condition of most people that live in sub-Saharan Africa. So what suggestions do you have to uplift the per capita income of people as a data analyst?
Wow, that is a really broad question. So having seen how bad the situation is for most people in sub-Saharan Africa, what suggestions would I give as a data scientist or as a data analyst? Maybe I would lead by saying we need to appreciate Africa's problems. Okay, just allow me to declare another handicap. Because I'm doing this webinar from home, my little son likes to try and moderate my calls. And right now he's walked into the room. I thought he wouldn't show up for a minute, but I'm just dealing with him. And okay, so I'm back. So basically, I would ask myself, what is it that Africa or the people in sub-Saharan Africa need, particularly those who are doing badly, for lack of a better word. Many times, the bigger challenge within Africa is an absence of information. And sometimes when people have the right information, it helps them make the right decisions. So from a data science perspective, I'm obviously thinking, or I'm at the moment biased towards anything to do with data. So I'll be thinking about increasing information transparency. Now, to increase information transparency, one of the primary pillars of communication or information disbursement are the telecoms. Reducing, let's say, charges or taxes on some of the operations, SMS, which is probably one of the easiest ways to get information out there, because most of the telecoms are going to send SMS to maybe the low-income people, and the low-income people have phones that are not exactly able to receive WhatsApp messages or probably data connections. So providing incentives for information transparency or more information disbursement to the populace might be a starting point. For that to happen, possibly reducing some of the taxes on the operations of telecoms, not necessarily all the taxes, but taxes on some of the communications, probably voice calls, SMS calls, text calls. That's just one angle. The other is we also have to be aware that low-income people or people who are really struggling fall into different categories, and each category might have a very specific need. For instance, farmers might have a need that is very distinctively different from people who are doing animal husbandry or animal rearing. People who are growing maize predominantly might have different needs from people who are growing Irish potatoes. And when we understand these needs, it's fairly easy to begin to develop solutions for them. Excuse me. So I'd say another angle would be, not an immediate solution, but first to analyze the magnitude of the problem, the challenges that they're facing, and then provide a number of solutions that are tailored to their particular challenges. Sadly, why I started by saying that this is a fairly broad one is because the answer to that could span multiple domains. I mean, there's politics, there's management, there's finance involved in all of that. All the solutions have an aspect of this. Without good governance, it's definitely going to be difficult to help these people. Then on the other hand, with high taxes, which is some of the situations that we actually have in sub-Saharan Africa, we have real problems. But just to give a final thought, especially with regards to the tax regime, there have been questions that have been raised about VAT as a tax and its relevance, especially to the low-income people. Governments definitely need to get the revenue, but on the other hand, are we not inflating the cost of certain items by simply applying things like VAT to them? So it's just food for thought that perhaps if certain taxes were subsidized or significantly reduced or offset, then it might actually help improve the livelihoods of people. Now, while I say that, I'm also aware that there have been studies that have been done in the past that reveal that reduction in certain taxes does not correlate with the improvement in the livelihoods of certain people. And if we are trying to help these people, then we might have to look at history and say which countries have actually reduced taxes and how have those reductions filtered down to the low-income people who we are trying to help. So I'm only mentioning these as eye-openers, just so that we can marinate upon them and say, maybe we can explore these options, chew on them a little further. But by no means am I an expert in many of these fields. I'm just sharing a few of my own personal opinions. I honestly hope that helps a bit.
Thank you very much, Sam. Apologies, we won't be able to get to the rest of the questions, but I do encourage you to engage with Sam on various Slack channels, whether it is the general channel, a direct message, or on one of the thematic channels that you've been added to. But again, thank you, Sam, for this presentation. We've now come to the end, and as I said, please, participants, feel free to engage with Sam on a one-to-one basis and ask your questions. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, Nicola. Have a good evening, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.